The Section 5 inspection regime is well underway, but for those on the front line, there are still a lot of questions. Five determined secondary maths coordinators from a cross-section of schools have come to Ofsted HQ to get their questions answered. With national maths results consistently under the spotlight, this is their opportunity to examine what inspectors are really looking for. Time to turn the tables on secondary maths inspector Lynn Churchman.
Being able to say at the end of each lesson what you've actually learnt in that lesson, I think is quite a challenge.
Probably the most shocking thing for me was the actual effect that the maths results had over the whole school inspection. The maths results held the school back from perhaps getting a higher grade.
And that's because there is quite a weight on the core subjects.
Right.
In terms of data and everything.
If you're not going visiting every department, how can you make a judgment about every department?
You don't make a judgment about every department. Right. One of the changes between the old regime and the new inspection arrangements is it is a much shorter report of the order of 6 or 7 pages.
So it's about the size of the summary page, I suppose.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. As a core subject, can we expect a paragraph on the maths department?
No.
Anyway?
No.
Wouldn't necessarily.
But if there's a particular issue with underachievement in the maths department, then yes, it would figure with more weight behind it than if there was underachievement in one of the foundation subjects, for example, which was, I think, your...
But we knew that the whole school had improved greatly, but the maths results were a weakness. The maths department were observed probably more than any other department in the school.
Where there are areas of underachievement or areas of concern, those areas will be looked at.
We knew where everybody lay, whether they were satisfactory, good or outstanding. And what the inspectors were doing were checking that our evaluation was the same as they would have given our staff. So.
But if a lot went on your results, that means there's quite a lot of weight on external exam results.
Yeah.
And the Key Stage 3, English, Maths and Science, and that's why it drives the whole school report.
Yes.
Then.
Yeah,
so the pressure on us is even more about external exam results.
Well, yes and no. There's the mixture, isn't there, between external exam results but progress learners are making. It wasn't so much about whether the exam results don't compare well with national averages. It's about the extent to which learners have progressed from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3.
But to measure the value added, you've got to perform in external exams. So it seems that external exams is the main issue for us.
Well, it always puts the core subjects in the spotlight, doesn't it?
It's great to use data, that's fine, but the data's going to have to be accurate for a start, and there has to be a consistency or some kind of review, I think, of how that data is used.
Yeah, I think I agree
and how the value added is worked out.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Are they coming from the raw scores or just from the levels themselves?
Yeah.
I'd agree with that, because my big beef is that in primary schools, some children have spent 6 years in primary school and achieved a level 2 or 3, and we're expected to shift it massively in 2 years, 3 years, at Key Stage 3.
Yeah.
I suppose what the inspection system really tries to do is look at what your systems are for monitoring children's progress. And an increasing number of schools now do the usual sort of grid analysis, where down one dimension you've got the Key Stage 2 results for the cohort and then the Key Stage 3 results across the top. And you can have a look at what proportion of youngsters progress one level, and that could and probably does represent really good progress for some youngsters. But some youngsters that come in at level 5 and only progress to level 6, you know how they've gone on during Key Stage 3. So you're in a position then to ask questions about, well, is that progress sufficient for that particular learner or for that particular group of learners? And I think what the more sophisticated data allows us to do is track groups and individuals and ask questions about whether that progress was good enough.
So you're trying to get away from the fact that this is the progress we expect everyone to make, this is what they have done, you haven't made it. In the story, it's more you'd be asking questions at the school and saying, are you tracking these pupils that aren't making
and finding out what the school's doing about working out where learners are supposed to get to.
But that's going to have issues with the subject reviews, in that, will I have to double up, or should that be tied into the specialist school targets, or I'm not sure how the subject review will work.
The requirements will be the same whether you're a specialist school or not, in that we'll be wanting to look at your own self-evaluation, what you know to be the things you want to work on, the areas for development, the relative strengths, and how that relates to your specialism would be only part of that picture. The subject survey experience for a school will probably feel a bit more like a shortened version of the Section 10. And so it would normally be one inspector over a 2-day period with your department.
Do we have to grade ourselves before you come?
Well, we would advocate that you do that. You're doing that constantly anyway. So we would expect that if we do a subject visit, that we then start from wherever you're at that point.
And what's the timescale for both of these? So how often are you likely to have a Section 5 and how often are you likely to have a subject?
Whole school inspections are on a 3-year cycle. You may or may not get a subject inspection in the intervening years. It's not random, it's actually very well organised, but the Subjects and Surveys programme, there's a survey in every subject and a survey in a number of other sort of cross-cutting things. So there's probably of the order of 20 or so surveys going on at any one time.
So it's not done on results particularly then?
No. If you end up in one of those samples, you can't draw any conclusions from it.
Right.
It doesn't sort of indicate anything. It's just
lessons at Key Stage 4, what would you be looking for in a really excellent Key Stage 4 lesson?
It's an interesting question, isn't it, that? Because actually, when we see really good lessons, the characteristics of really good lessons, it doesn't matter whether they're Key Stage 3 or Key Stage 4, a really good lesson has the same features. So I think the challenge for schools is to engage and motivate their learning in a way that gives them a fresh impetus.
It actually came up in our Key Stage 4 pupil panel. Did it? The fact that the actual children were asking, we would like our Key Stage 3 style lesson, please, in Key Stage 4. They want that beginning, the middle and the end. They want the cycle, they want to know what they've learned as they leave the door.
Being able to say at the end of each lesson what you've actually learnt in that lesson, I think is quite a challenge. But what I see a lot of schools shift to in Key Stage 4 is, in this unit of work over this fortnight, say, these are the 3 or 4 big things we're going to have covered, and keeping them aware of where they're at within that journey, I think is very valuable.
Do you think some teachers are using the strategies they've developed through the Key Stage 3 framework at Key Stage 4? And if they are, do you think that's a good thing?
One of the things we've commented on a number of times is we see the same teachers teaching in Key Stage 3 with a sort of an energy and enthusiasm that's evident in Key Stage 3, but follow the same teacher to a Key Stage 4 lesson and they behave differently. And some of that's to do with the people feeling the pressure of GCSE syllabus.
There's still an awful lot of subject matter at GCSE maths which is really impossible to make relevant.
There's a shift we've got to make about recognising that by the time they start in Year 10 they've done an awful lot of mathematics. So what is it that they know? What are they engaged in? What do they not make any sense of? And how you then build on that in Key Stage 4 I think is crucial. So a lot of schools are doing it through trying to make maths more relevant and interesting, and also increasing the amount of discussion work and actually putting the onus on them to make sense of what they do and don't understand at the moment and what they need to do next on a particular topic or in a particular area to move on to the next level. And then they're more...
You've got the springboard that supports it, etc. In Key Stage 4, it's great to say, yes, we need to do this and we need to improve the way we do more collaborative work, but that takes a lot of planning, a heck of a lot of planning. I'm not sure the time's there.
One of the things we've been critical of in the Ofsted reports recently for maths is the extent to which schemes of work are not strong enough to support inexperienced, newly qualified, new teachers to the school. A lot of teachers have got some really good maths activities. They're not just applicable to Key Stage 3, but you need to think a bit more carefully about how you might use them in Key Stage 4, especially if the youngsters have actually experienced those activities or that particular section of these materials in Key Stage 3.
Because if we're not careful, we'll all go away and invent a Key Stage 4 scheme of work independently all across the country. You know, we ought to have...
But you've got it really, haven't you? You've got it in the sense that you've got the national curriculum, you've got the GCSE syllabus. The bit that I think we're less good at grafting onto that is how in each of those you're going to move them on fractions, decimals and percentages, as well as developing their ability to use and apply the maths in the sense of solving problems and looking at contexts that are unfamiliar to them and so on. So that's the challenge. And in a sense, I don't think a whole country scheme of work or framework will do that.
No,
but it would be a starting point, wouldn't it?
That's the point, isn't it? It's a starting point, I think. And you know, you're saying we've got the national curriculum, we've got the programme study from, say, the exam boards, etc. But that's just telling us topics. That's just saying these are what you need to cover by the end of Key Stage 4 to get this grade.
And if you're not careful, the examples you use are the exam questions, so then you're teaching towards the exam, aren't you, rather than doing what we want to do.
Which is get them thinking about the conceptual underpinning behind whatever topic it is you're working on. Go on then, Jill.
We're trying an experiment with our Key Stage 4 grouping, and we're having 3 higher groups, 3 intermediate groups and then 2 foundation groups. But rather than numbering them 1 down to 8, the middle groups are just called intermediate groups. And we've made this absolutely clear to the students. So,
and you've actually kept the groups parallel in the sense of range of attainment within the groups?
Yes.
When you've got parallel groupings, you can have your teachers working in teams as well, can't you? So you've got 3 groups that are ostensibly working as parallel groups, and you as head of department then can factor into each of those sub-teams one of your specialists, one of your, your strongest teachers.
You see, I'm interested that you say that's an experiment, because we did that 3 or 4 years ago, and I feel that we've been forced into setting rigidly. I feel we've been forced into exam results, the gifted students, pushing those. You come to a major external exam, and how do you teach half a class? How do you prepare half of them for intermediate and half of them for higher?
At some point, the intermediate demands stop, don't they, and the higher tier demands start. But actually, if you've got a group where there's a range of attainment, then what you're trying to do is teach that topic and get all learners to the point that they understand as much of that as they can. And then your decisions about intermediate entry or higher tier entry are actually made very late in the day, aren't they? They don't really need to be made till well into year 11, after the mocks, for example.
I've always been interested in how maths applies to other areas. As soon as you start talking about primary and secondary data, you're into primary and secondary sources for history and art again for ratio, and it's quite nice bringing those things in.
We got a cry for help from the science department quite recently. They were a bit dubious about teaching standard deviation, but one of my staff actually went across and taught the lesson. Team taught it with the science teacher, and I would encourage other members of my school, other staff in my school, to invite the maths department in to help with the numeracy side of things.
I think other teachers, though, across the school have the same fear of maths as we were talking about earlier, though. We've talked about cross-curricular and this is how we teach this in maths, but, I've heard the geography teachers saying, well, we just do it like this because it works. So I think some of it is down to how confident the other teachers feel actually teaching mathematical techniques.
But also for the consistency and continuity of the teaching method, because sometimes you have children in your class, in a mathematics class, you teach them method and they suddenly say, oh, but I did that in science, but they'd learnt it in a different way. And actually for them to have the consistency of teaching, that will actually will work for them, I believe, a lot better, that they can actually see the relationships, actually how their lessons are in different subjects, crossing over each other.
As soon as you shift the expectations, you are going to have, teachers and learners and parents wondering what's going on.
Yes.
Yeah, but that can be part of the scary part, I suppose, is to do this, you have to try things. Or trying it with live students.
Yeah.
So you think,
but
what if I try that and it doesn't work properly? What's going to happen to my results? What's going to happen to their learning, etc.? So, I think I'm quite cautious about.
But if you involve them in the trialling and the experimenting and the being a bit more innovative, yes, it might feel a bit more uncomfortable or a bit more risk-taking, but we only break new ground when we take risks.